This is an old tale. Cliché, actually. A bored married man meets a woman younger than himself and his wife and starts an affair. There's passion, fun, adventure. It feels like a summer camp. It goes fast, it's exciting, but it has to end eventually. Which means that someone will be hurt. But you're never gonna guess who. My name is Alex, and this is Poland Unveiled. Oh, what a story I bring you today. Ambiguous would be the best word to describe it. Also heartbreaking, terrifying, sometimes infuriating. Definitely very interesting. But before we get into the story, a short disclaimer about the sources. Usually, books are my go-to source when it comes to my research for the podcast, but not this time. There is a book, its title is Czarna. It was written by Wojciech Kuczok. But the thing is that this book is said to be inspired by the events I'm going to talk about today. And this is simply not enough. When I was looking for this book online, some bookstores categorize it as non-fiction, whereas others treated it simply as a novel. So I was hesitant about using it as my source simply because I can't be sure which parts of the book are actually fact-based and which are not. So I didn't buy the book, I haven't read it yet. And because of that, there might generally be fewer details in my podcast than in the podcast of those creators who used Kuczok's book as their source, or some details in my podcast might differ from what you might have already heard about the story. Surprisingly, there are not many sources for this case. I base my research mostly on the district court's verdict, the public business registry, a local graveyard website, and of course, newspapers. There were some documentary TV programs made about this case, but unfortunately, they're not available anymore. So, now that we have that clear, let's dive right into the story. It started in 1997 when a 7-year-old boy named Piotr started school. Kids in Poland go to school when they're 7. On his first day, Piotr met his teacher, Miss Mariola. For the next 3 years, Miss Mariola was supposed to become one of the most important people in the boys' world. And this is because in the first 3 years of primary school, children only have one teacher, regardless of the subject they are taught. For those 3 years, kids get used to and grow very fond of their teacher, and they treat them like a mixture of an auntie or uncle and a parent. Piotr was a smart boy. He loved jigsaw puzzles, he did well at school, and just like the rest of the children in his class, or school really, he liked Miss Mariola very much. He wasn't the only one though. Miss Mariola, apart from being a very good early childhood education teacher, was also a beautiful young woman. In 1997, she was only 34, single, blonde, shaped like a model, and on top of that, very intelligent. She was definitely someone with whom both a kid and a grown-up could have a stimulating conversation. All this did not escape the attention of Jerzy, Piotr's father. Jerzy was 41 years old. He was an entrepreneur, very well known in the local community of Czarna Białostocka, which is a little town in northeastern Poland. He was also quite an involved father, as one might think, since he took on the role of the head of the parents' committee in his son's school. Fathers rarely do that. I'm speculating that the reason why he might have wanted to take on this role was to spend some time with his son's beautiful teacher. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he was the head of the parents' committee earlier, because you need to know that Jerzy had 2 more children, 2 girls, who at the time, based on the information I found, were 13 and 15 and also went to primary school. Very likely the same as their younger brother. Jerzy also had a wife. If my research is correct, she was the same age as Jerzy, 41. I found very little reliable information on Jerzy's wife. I don't know what she did for a living. Maybe, given that her husband was financially successful and they had a family of 5, she could afford to be a homemaker. But I don't know that. I'm only speculating here. I decided not to mention her name or the names of the girls because I believe they deserve peace after what happened, which you'll find out later in the story. All that matters now is that when Jerzy decided to start an affair with his son's teacher, which is what inevitably happened, he was a dad to 3 children and a husband. Did Miss Mariola know about that? I'm sure she did, from the start. As I said, Jerzy was a known person in the local community, so was his family. And after all, Mariola was his son's teacher, so she must have had access to the boy's personal data, including the names of his parents, and she would surely meet both of them at parent-teacher meetings. As opposed to her lover, though, Miss Mariola was perfectly single. Nothing stopped her from entering a relationship with a married man and falling in love with him head over heels, even the fact that he was cheating on his wife. And because of that, it was more than likely that the story would end up badly one way or another. Even though Miss Mariola wasn't a naive teenager anymore, she believed her relationship with Jerzy really stood a chance, especially when he was telling her such beautiful things about their future. That one day he would divorce his wife, with whom he was utterly bored, unable to talk to or reconnect with. That life would be easier with someone like Miss Mariola, whom he so effortlessly loved. But before all that happens, they would have to wait. For years. Until his baby boy grows up, because Jerzy would hate for Piotr to be raised in a broken family. For his sake, he was gonna stay in an unhappy marriage so that his kid would have a happy home and childhood. That was one of the reasons why Miss Mariola and Jerzy's affair had to be kept a secret. I mean, apart from the obvious reason, which was to keep Jerzy's wife completely unaware of the situation. Plus, they wanted to keep both their very good reputations in the community. But besides that, according to Jerzy, Piotr was the main reason why Miss Mariola and Jerzy couldn't be together openly and officially. When I heard the story for the first time a few years ago, Jerzy's family situation was portrayed slightly differently from what I'm telling you now. It was always stressed that Jerzy's 2 daughters were much older than Piotr, and at the time when the story happened, they were grown-up women and didn't live with their parents anymore. So it looked more like a family of 3 rather than a family of 5, with the parents focused entirely on the youngest, Piotr. Piotr was also described by some sources as a surprise child, who was born when his parents thought they were long done with having children, since their other 2 kids were already adults. That was to show even more that to Jerzy, his son, the only one at home, out of 3 children, the youngest, the cutest, unexpected, and, let's be honest, a boy, finally, was an absolute center of the universe. But based on what I found, Piotr's sisters weren't that much older than him. They were still children in 1997. As I said, they were 13 and 15. And because of that, I think the entire family lived together. Not that the girls had already moved out. Piotr might have also been an unexpected child, but not born late to his parents. They were both 34 when the boy was born, which I find a very appropriate and young age to have children. About the fact that Piotr was his father's favorite, that's totally possible, and I won't argue with that. But it seems to me that, regardless of Jerzy's true feelings, the girls were completely overlooked by the media in this whole situation, which is simply unfair. Stating that Jerzy wanted to protect only his son out of 3 children might not only be untrue, but also hurtful to his daughters. Why would he only care about Piotr's well-being, but not his 2 teenage girls who needed their dad and a safe and happy home just as much as their younger brother? This whole effort to keep things between Miss Mariola and Jerzy private turned out to be futile anyway. We're talking about a small town here. A local entrepreneur and a popular teacher must have been spotted together far too many times, and eventually, gossiping started. Initially, Jerzy publicly claimed that Miss Mariola accompanied him often as an interpreter. She knew several foreign languages, he made international deals for his company, so this could have made sense, but only once or twice. Not for years, especially when we talk about a young, beautiful woman and a married man along together quite often. It's hard to tell when the news broke exactly. Was it a few months into the affair, a year or more? Eventually, though, Jerzy's wife found out. We don't know what her reaction was at the time, but the fact is that the couple stayed together. What I can tell you though, is that, according to the newspapers, Jez's wife found out about her husband's affair thanks to Miss Mariola's mother. I think it's time to tell you more about Mariola and her family. Mariola was born in 1963 in Białystok, the capital city of the Podlaskie Voivodeship in northeastern Poland. Her parents were both teachers, and because of that, they were a very respected couple in their small town community, and also they cared very much about their immaculate reputation. They worked very hard for it. Mariola had an older sister, Małgorzata. I don't know what Małgorzata did for a living, but Mariola followed her parents' footsteps and decided to go to uni and become a teacher as well. She studied in Olsztyn, a town in a neighborhood voivodeship about an hour away from her hometown. Unfortunately, when Mariola was about 21, 22, so either when she was just getting her bachelor's degree or about to start a master's program at uni, Mariola received information that her dad had died. He was only 50, so I suspect an illness or an accident. Definitely a tragedy that must have greatly impacted a young girl. That was most likely the moment when Mariola returned to her hometown, Czarna Białostocka, and moved in with her mom. She took a job as an early childhood education teacher at a local primary school, and ever since that moment, for about 12 years, her life had been calm, predictable, and filled with responsibilities. So much so that the sources unanimously claim that Miss Mariola didn't have time for any love life. That until 1997, when she met Jerzy, Mariola had never had a serious boyfriend before, or had never been in love. I don't know if anyone has ever asked Miss Mariola this question directly, so one can't really be sure if those speculations are true, but the truth is that Jerzy seemed to Mariola as the love of her life. Truly. They were crazy about each other. And how do we know that? When everyone in town found out that Miss Mariola had an affair with a married entrepreneur, he was having an affair just as much, but this is not how the locals approached the situation, obviously. People got angry. I mean, I completely understand the wife of Jerzy, his family in general, but the rest of the community also felt entitled to their outrage and pearl clutching. A woman who is a teacher to small kids, having an affair? Even though it wasn't Mariola who had an affair, because she was single. What kind of an example was she setting? What about Jerzy? Well, naughty boy, but boys will be boys. Midlife crisis. He should buy his wife some flowers and apologize, but in general, no biggie. His wife stayed. His business didn't seem to be in any way impacted by the gossip, as opposed to Mariola's life, which changed quite drastically. The woman started to get threats, to be called names, to receive dead phone calls. Her family was also impacted. Her mom, who up until that point was a respected member of the community, a widow and a retired teacher, suddenly realized that she was completely left out of social life. She wasn't invited over to her friends, and she wasn't attending parties, which was incredibly important to her, and she realized that her younger daughter is to blame. Miss Mariola didn't have much support from her mom at the time. The elderly woman tried everything in her power to stop her daughter's affair. That's why she went to Jerzy's wife and told her about everything. She was so sick and tired of the gossip that she was ready to humiliate and maybe even endanger her own daughter for the sake of her reputation. That's not all. According to some sources, the mother of Mariola was so controlling that she wanted her long adult daughter, who probably lived with her as a courtesy, because I don't believe that Mariola couldn't afford to rent her own place. She probably lived with her mom so that she wouldn't be lonely. She wanted her adult daughter to tell her why and where she leaves the house every time she did it, and when she's gonna be back. And also, the mother would go as far as to rooting in her daughter's dirty laundry, to look at her underwear, see if there are any mucus stains, and that way trying to determine if her over 30-year-old daughter had a recent intercourse. I'm afraid it's not a joke. So, getting back to my initial point, the reason I believe that Miss Mariola truly fell in love with Jerzy is that she lived through this hell of slander, stress, and control from her own mother for the entire 4 years of the affair. 4 years. with no support from anyone but her lover. But she endured all this because she had reason to believe that one day it would end. That Jerzy would actually divorce his wife once the kids are grown and be with her. That maybe they'd move out from Czarna Białostocka, get a place to live, and start their new lives, this time together. Unfortunately, that never happened. After years of hiding and meeting in hotels, Jerzy decided he wanted to be a decent man again, and suddenly ended things with Mariola somewhere in the beginning of 2001. For Miss Mariola, it was the absolute end of the world. Jerzy was everything to her. But, according to the sources, Piotr, his son, was everything to Jerzy. At the time, in 2001, Piotr was almost 11, so still a very young boy. The girls were, at the time, 17 and 19, so one of them was technically a grown-up, but at that age, kids in Poland usually still go to high school and live with their parents. Actually, it seems to me that the older daughter was graduating from high school that year and about to take her Matura exam, which is something similar to the American SAT or A-levels in the UK, which made it quite an important and stressful time for the entire family. So all kids were still young, not only Piotr, and they all needed support in a normal family situation. Mariola couldn't make peace with that. When she lost Jerzy, she lost everything she truly cared for. Within a few weeks, she became a shadow of her former beautiful, confident, and brilliant self. Her heart was broken, and based on what her mother said about that period of Mariola's life, it seems that the woman could have developed depression. Apparently, Miss Mariola, unable to deal with the pain she was going through, started taking meds, sedatives, and painkillers. But there was no information that she had those meds actually prescribed, which would mean that she went to a doctor to get help. It looks more like she got the meds by herself and didn't try to get help from anyone. She couldn't sleep, she had a weird stare, as her mother said, and eventually tried to take her own life, twice. Which is what we also know from her mother, who spoke about it in court. Makes me wonder if at any point she tried to help her child, or if she was one of those people who would hate the scandal and was rather mad at Mariola for her attempts. Miss Mariola was so desperate to get the love of her life back that on the 24th of April 2001, she went to meet with Jerzy's wife. All we know is that the two women survived the meeting and that it changed nothing in the situation between Mariola and Jerzy. But it did change something in Mariola. She realized then that there was no hope, that she lost, and thought to herself that she would never be happy again. Sources say that this was also a moment when her despair turned into anger, and when she decided that if she can't be happy, then Jerzy wouldn't be happy too. However, I'm not sure if I agree with that take. On the next day, the 25th of April 2001, it was Wednesday and a school day, Mariola got up in the morning and got ready to leave the house. She told her mother that she would only be out a minute and asked if she should take the home keys with her in case her mother wanted to leave the house after Mariola. Her mother stayed at home though. It didn't seem as though Miss Mariola was headed to school because she said she'd be back very soon, and that day she started her classes in the afternoon, but Miss Mariola did go to school. However, not to work. It was about 10 a.m. when she entered the school building. She went to the school secretary's office and asked for a key to the school nurse's office. She said she wanted to weigh herself. She got the key without a problem, and on the way to the nurses, she grabbed two kids and asked them to find Piotr Popławski, the 4th grade student, and bring him to the school nurse's office. The kids obviously didn't ask any questions. They found Piotr's classroom, he was in the middle of the arts class, and passed him the message. The boy went to the school nurse without suspicion, a normal thing that children get weighed or measured every once in a while. He was surprised, however, when in the office he saw not the nurse, but his former teacher and, as he already knew, his father's former lover. What happened next, we will never know for sure. According to Miss Mariola, she only wanted to talk with the boy. About what, though? About what was an adult woman supposed to talk to an 11-year-old, especially given a very weird situation they were both in? Miss Mariola testified later that Piotr not only knew about his father's affair with her, but also that he found her guilty of it, that he hated her for it. Apparently, the boy admitted that he was the one who made the dead phone calls to her house. And then he started calling her names. Miss Mariola couldn't stand it. The very reason why the best relationship in her life ended was standing in front of her, yelling and cussing. Without thinking much, she pulled out a utility knife, which symbolically was a gift she received from Jerzy, and started stabbing his son. An 11-year-old didn't stand a chance against an angry adult woman who aimed mostly at his neck. What alarmed the witnesses in the school corridor was noises coming from the office and, according to some sources, the stream of blood from under the door. The students and teachers who were at the scene tried to open the door to the school nurse's office, but Miss Mariola was either holding it from the other side or had locked it beforehand. Mariola, and there are two versions, either eventually opened the door by herself only to run away immediately, or the door was kicked open by the PE teacher. Nobody stopped the killer. Everyone rushed to see what was happening with Piotr. The boy was lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. The teachers tried to help him, but it was too late. The child got too many wounds to his neck and died before the ambulance arrived. In such a small town like this, with only 3 schools in the area, the information that an ambulance and then the police rushed to one of the primary schools spread like wildfire, probably within minutes. The parents of the children gathered by the school entrance, waiting for more information. Everyone was hoping that the situation had nothing to do with any child, and then, when it became clear that one of the children was hurt, all the parents prayed that it wasn't their child. Jerzy and his wife were also present at the scene and eventually got called to the school and informed about what happened. There is no information on how they took it, but I believe you can all imagine how it went. Piotr's body was taken to the morgue and examined, where it turned out that the boy received about 30 slash and stab wounds, mostly to his neck and head area. There would be nothing any doctor could do to help him. He didn't stand a chance of surviving this. To his family's heartbreak, Piotr Popławski died 4 days before his 11th birthday. His loved ones had probably already bought gifts for him, maybe even planned a birthday party for the coming Sunday. Instead of blowing balloons and getting a cake for the family's youngest, they had to arrange for his funeral, which took place 2 days later, on the 27th of April 2001. This, by the way, surprises me that the child was buried so soon after the murder, but apparently less than 2 days was enough to carry out an autopsy and prepare the body for the burial. This event was so immensely stressful for Piotr's father, Jerzy, that he didn't attend his child's funeral. He wasn't there, unlike his wife and daughters. I'm trying to imagine what Piotr's mom must have felt, and I'm getting to the conclusion that I'll never be able to imagine that. That woman first suffered the humiliation and heartbreak of her husband's affair, but this is nothing in comparison with the fact that the husband's mistress killed her baby. This is unimaginable. How do you wrap your head around it? How do you make peace with the fact that another woman irreversibly ripped your family apart by taking the life of its youngest and most vulnerable member? I don't know how people deal with situations like this. What was happening with Miss Mariola during this time? Straight after the murder, she just disappeared. The police started the search immediately after the murder of Piotr. There was absolutely no doubt who killed the boy, so the police knew where to go first. They knocked on Mariola's family home door, where they found her mother, and asked to search the house. They didn't tell her what happened. She found out from her neighbor, who told her that, I quote, Mariola slit some kid's throat. The woman was in shock. She led the officers in to search the house, and even though Miss Mariola wasn't there, the police managed to find something else. A letter that Miss Mariola wrote to Jerzy, which was supposed to be of a personal nature, as the police described it, without citing its contents. However, it was speculated that in the letter, Miss Mariola described 11-year-old Piotr as an obstacle on the way to her happy relationship with Jerzy. The police issued a wanted notice for Mariola Miszkiewicz, since the woman was nowhere to be found and she could still be dangerous. Some local newspapers claimed that before the murder, Miss Mariola wiped out her bank account and that her passport disappeared from their house, so it was speculated that a woman would try to flee the country. Hence, the wanted notice was very much needed to, I guess, warn the airports and border crossings. Sometime later, during the trial, Mariola's mother rectified the information on her daughter's bank account, claiming that Mariola didn't take any money from the bank and that the newspapers took this information from God knows where. But the information about the passport was confirmed in court. Miss Mariola had it in her backpack on the day when she killed Piotr. It mattered later in court because if the woman had taken her passport before committing the murder, that would imply that she had planned the whole thing, including her escape. At that point, however, there was no proof that Mariola fled the country, and the police focused on searching for her in the backwoods encompassing Czarna Białostocka. As it turned out, Mariola wasn't there. And the police found out about this not because they managed to search through the entire area, but because Miss Mariola, within about 24 hours of the murder, called her sister, Małgorzata. As Małgorzata testified in court, her sister was aware of what she did, and she was afraid of consequences. She was even wondering whether she could be sentenced to the death penalty for what she did. That was impossible in 2001, by the way. Mariola asked her older sister for advice on what she should do. She was taking suicide into account, given the circumstances. But Małgorzata told her, sensibly, that Mariola should turn herself in and bear the consequences of her actions as an adult person. Mariola agreed and confessed that she managed to get to a monastery in Marki, a town right next to Warsaw, about 200 kilometers away from Czarna Białostocka. Hard to tell how Miss Mariola got there. It couldn't have been on foot. It was too far in too short a period of time. Nobody has ever mentioned whether Miss Mariola had a car and whether she could use it to escape. So there's another option that someone gave her a lift, probably not even knowing who she was or what she did. Late at night, on the 26th of April 2001, the police arrived at the monastery in Marki, accompanied by Małgorzata, Mariola's sister, and arrested her on suspicion of the murder of Piotr Popławski. From that moment on, the woman had been incarcerated. The trial started a few months later, on the 17th of October 2001. Given the nature of the crime, the fact that a child was killed, the court decided to hold most of the hearings behind closed doors, including those of Miss Mariola and the family of Piotr. We do know, however, that Mariola Miszkiewicz pleaded guilty. Apparently, during her first interrogation at the prosecutor's office, shortly after she was arrested in April, Mariola claimed that she was in a state of extreme emotional distress, that she didn't control herself when she attacked Piotr, and she used the emotional distress argument in court as her defense line. If you're wondering what difference it makes in a homicide case, let me tell you that normally Mariola would be facing 25 years imprisonment or even life imprisonment for the murder. But if her lawyer could prove her diminished capacity due to her emotional state at the moment of the murder, then the maximum penalty would be only 10 years. The psychological assessment of the defendant was crucial in this case, and it turned out that Miss Mariola was mentally healthy. But, according to the experts, at the time of the murder, she experienced a temporary loss of control over her actions. To confirm this, the specialist pointed at the very obvious overkill in this case. 1 or 2 wounds in the boy's neck would be enough to kill him, whereas Mariola stabbed Piotr about 30 times, aiming at the neck and head, but also his arms when he intuitively tried to shield himself from the stabs. Not to mention the fact, and this is my comment, that it was a small child. He was absolutely no danger to Mariola, and she still attacked him so brutally. One more thing about the psychological assessment is that its first part surprised me, the one about no signs of mental illness in Mariola's behavior, because from the outside, it seemed that during those few weeks before the murder, after the breakup with Jerzy, the woman was severely depressed. And depression is a very serious mental illness that, apparently, in this case, the doctors couldn't confirm. It was also stated that Miss Mariola was above average intelligent and that she had trouble showing emotions. That was actually one of the most repeated accusations towards the defendant, that she was cold, heartless during the trial, that she never apologized. She did, eventually. As if she wasn't sorry for what she did. The prosecution stated that the reason why Miss Mariola killed Piotr was to punish Jerzy, his father. She knew how important Piotr was to his father, and she wanted to make her ex-lover miserable, make him regret breaking up with her. That was what the prosecutor stated. Some sources mentioned a different reason why Miss Mariola could have wanted to kill her former partner's child, which aligns with the speculated contents of the letter Miss Mariola wrote to Jerzy and left at home. That, in her eyes, Piotr could have been seen as the reason why she couldn't be with Jerzy anymore. The boy was an obstacle to a happy relationship. But do I agree with that? From my point of view, and I'm speaking as a person both mentally healthy and completely uninvolved in the situation, killing Piotr could obviously only change things for worse. Mariola couldn't have possibly imagined that after she killed his baby, Jerzy would come running to her with the mindset of, I don't have a son anymore, so we can be together now. This is ridiculous. But maybe Miss Mariola was in her perfectly right mind when she was making that decision, if that was a decision at all, because let's not forget that her defense line was diminished capacity due to extreme emotional distress, an AMOC, if I may. It took the court 5 hearings, a little over 4 months, to be ready to issue a verdict on the case. To some, it was surprising because on the 15th of February 2002, Miss Mariola was sentenced to 25 years imprisonment for killing her former student. Why was it surprising? Because, as I said, the mental health specialists who examined Mariola were adamant that the woman was in extreme emotional distress at the time of the murder. That's why it was possible, and by some expected, that Miss Mariola would face no more than 10 years imprisonment. She also used to have an immaculate reputation, well, up to a moment when she and Jerzy started an affair. She was a beloved teacher. About that, some children had a very different opinion. As it turned out, they called her rigid and sometimes even slightly violent. And Miss Mariola has never been in any legal trouble before. One could call her a model citizen until the 25th of April 2001. But all this didn't help in this case. The court completely dismissed the psychologist's review of the defendant's behavior during the attack. The judge said that for someone who is supposed to have lost all control over their behavior, be blind with fury, Miss Mariola managed to make some very sane and sober decisions. For example, she not only had the utility knife with her on the day of the murder, the knife that she got from the victim's father, may I remind you, but she kept it at hand, with the blade unlocked and slid out, ready to attack. She aimed not just anywhere on the child's body, but precisely at the neck arteries, as it's trying to make sure that the boy wouldn't survive it. After the attack, she wouldn't let anyone into the nurse's office. She was intentionally holding the door so that no one could get in and help the boy. In the court's opinion, the entire attack was planned, starting from Miss Mariola getting to school early with a knife and passport in her backpack. Then she got access to a safe space that was the nurse's office, and she summoned Piotr to the office, but not by herself, because she probably thought he wouldn't want to come, but she used 2 other students to do that for her. She ambushed her lover's son, stating that she only wanted to talk to him. But about what? Was it really about talking? Would she lock the door and have a knife ready to attack if she only wanted to talk? Did the fact that the boy started cussing her, according to Miss Mariola, even matter in this situation? To court, it didn't. And according to the court, it was all planned. Hence, quite a harsh but not the harshest verdict of 25 years imprisonment. Miss Mariola appealed the verdict, and a few months later, on the 28th of October 2002, the appeal court looked into the case again. Miss Mariola also testified again and tried to convince the court that she didn't plan the murder, and weeping, she explained that before the murder she had already made plans for the future, that she wanted to leave Czarna Białostocka, but it wasn't possible right at that moment, that she was seeking support from her family, but she didn't get it anywhere, and that eventually, on the 25th of April 2001, she did that terrible thing, and it was totally her fault, but again, she didn't plan that. It just happened. The family of Piotr didn't agree with that statement and recalled the letter that Miss Mariola wrote to Jerzy, which up until that point was fully classified, and in which she allegedly stated that after what she planned to do, he wouldn't want to live anymore. Also, given the wounds on Piotr's body and traces found at the crime scene, it looked as if Piotr tried to run away after the first stab, but Miss Mariola chased after him. She didn't let him go. She didn't stop this. And she made sure he wouldn't be able to leave the nurse's office. The next day, on the 29th of October 2002, the appeal court was ready to issue its verdict on the appeal case. The original 25-year imprisonment sentence was upheld in force, to the prosecution's and Propłaski family's relief. However, the appeal court pointed out that not getting the psychological assessment of the defendant into consideration during the first trial was a mistake. The judge stated that the diminished capacity due to the extreme emotional distress of the defendant was indisputable. It's quite surprising what the judge said, isn't it? Then why wasn't the sentence lowered? Polish criminal code states that a sentence for homicide may be mitigated if the act was committed under a strong emotional disturbance, but only where that disturbance was justified by the circumstances. In other words, Mariola would have to be triggered by something so bad that her reaction would seem excusable or reasonable, and that was not the case here. What would be an understandable or reasonable reaction in the situation? Maybe kicking the boy out of the office when he started to use bad words at her? Maybe yelling at him, telling him to shut up? Slapping his face would already be too much. But stabbing him to death only because he called her I guess we can all imagine what he called her, was extreme, unforgivable, completely unreasonable, especially given the fact that Miss Mariola was a grown-up dealing with a child, which was something she did for a living. She was a teacher. She was supposed to know better than this, be wiser, take the high road. Instead, she let herself get provoked by a stupid situation she herself created. Of course, as long as her explanation that it was Piotr who triggered her is true, because if she planned to kill him, and there is evidence that she did, then regardless of what the boy did or didn't do, he didn't stand a chance. He would die that day anyway. Miss Mariola didn't make peace with her 25-year imprisonment sentence and filed for the annulment of the verdict to the Supreme Court, but the motion was dismissed on the 29th of May 2003, over 2 years after Piotr's death. In 2016, 15 years after the murder, Miss Mariola filed for parole. She was 53 at the time, still relatively young, still plenty of life to live ahead of her, but her motion was denied. As the spokesperson of the prison service explained, there is an unspoken rule that the first motion for parole is always denied, just because. The second or the third one, closer to the end of the prison sentence, is usually more successful. However, there was no information on whether Miss Mariola applied for parole ever again, and if she didn't, then she served her time in full until the 20th of April 2026. Yeah, she's just left prison. It was speculated that once Miss Mariola left prison, the murder case would make the headlines once again, but it didn't, even though the case is quite unusual and shocking. A woman, a teacher, kills a child. Hard to tell why exactly. As one of the people interviewed in Czarna Białostocka shortly after the murder pointed out, it would be more understandable if she tried to hurt Jerzy, or even his wife, their rival. But little Piotr, it's truly mind-boggling. Piotr would be 36 today. Unfortunately, his life was mercilessly ended before his 11th birthday. He will forever be remembered as his parents' baby boy and his sister's baby brother. I'm unable to tell you how much his death changed the lives of his family. I know that Piotr's grandmother died quite young, a few months after his death. She was only 64. And I believe it was his great-grandpa who also died shortly after Grandma. Did they die due to the grief? Hard to tell, but it's possible. I don't know if the parents of Piotr Popławski stayed together. They attended court together. They also both had an idea of remembering their son by putting a memorial on the wall of the school where Piotr died. They went to school together and had it mounted there to commemorate what happened. However, once some people started to put candles there and flowers, the parents of children who attended the school realized that this place looked like a cemetery and that children were terrified of this place. So they requested the memorial be taken off, and it eventually was. What about Piotr's sisters? As I mentioned earlier, if what I found out about their age was right, then it seems that the tragic death of their brother happened during an important time at school for both of them. The older sister was shortly before graduation and literally days before her matura exam. And failing it wouldn't be the end of the world, obviously. One can always retake it, but the kid was literally on a crossroads in her life, and her father's affair and then the death of her baby brother definitely didn't help her situation. Jerzy Popławski is still an entrepreneur. Seems that his business has been running as usual since 1983, and neither his affair nor the tragic death of his son impacted his professional life. People say that when it comes to his personal life, he's the one who is still paying the highest price for his affair, but I disagree. The highest price was paid by his son, and then his wife. I don't know what I would do if I were her. I hope she's a better person than I am, and that she managed to get back on her feet after what happened. I feel truly sorry for her. Anyway, that would be it for today, folks. How do you like that I uploaded a new episode so soon after the previous one? It's kinda new to me too. I will try to post more often. I also decided to shorten my episodes. No huge cases for now. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I hope we'll hear each other in the next episode.